Only one man survived the mission. The others were captured. And what happened next was worse than death. Shishi Jima is a small Japanese island located about 980 kilometers from mainland Japan. This island spans just 35 square kilometers and is home to a population of around 2,000 people. Today, this peaceful-looking island hides a dark and bloody history. During World War II, it wasn't just a brutal battlefield. It also held a terrifying secret that would haunt the U.S. military for decades. In July 1944, America's full-scale war against Japan was at its peak, and Japan was suffering defeats on multiple fronts. On the island of Shishi Jima, the Japanese military had built strong defenses, including 2 vital radio towers. Strategically, the island was extremely important for Japan's communications. To destroy Japan's communication lines, the U.S. military decided to bomb the 2 radio towers on Shishi Jima. But the entire island was covered with a deadly web of anti-aircraft guns. Reaching the bombing targets in the island's skies was nearly impossible. Even getting close was a huge risk for enemy aircraft. Still, America launched bombing missions from its aircraft carriers deployed in the Pacific, sending squadrons of advanced warplanes toward Shishi Jima. But the fierce Japanese resistance forced American forces to back off. After losing several planes, the U.S. temporarily postponed its attack. For 2 months, the U.S. kept trying to destroy the towers through airstrikes, but every mission came at a heavy cost. Planes and pilots lost. In September 1944, the U.S. Air Force launched another mission. 15 Avenger aircraft took part in this raid. They flew out from the U.S. aircraft carrier, USS San Jacinto. Among the pilots was a 20-year-old named George, the youngest pilot in the U.S. Navy at that time. On the morning of the mission, George boarded the plane with his radio operator, Dale, and gunner Ted. Together with the rest of the group, they set off toward Shishi Jima. To avoid anti-aircraft fire, they flew at an altitude of 8,000 feet, staying out of enemy range. But to drop the bombs, George had to descend dangerously low. He dove steeply, aiming directly at one of the radio towers. As bullets whizzed past, he pushed the aircraft as close to the target as possible. But then, his plane was hit multiple times by enemy fire. Still, George managed to release the bombs. For the first time, the explosives landed extremely close to the tower, causing irreparable damage. The tower was now out of action. But the price George paid for this dive was high. His plane had taken several hits and caught fire. At any moment, it could explode or crash. George immediately turned the plane toward the open sea. He wanted to eject over water, far enough from the island to avoid capture. He knew the Japanese would arrest anyone who ejected too close to their shores. He was determined not to fall alive into enemy hands. As the burning plane lost altitude, all 3 men prepared to eject. George bailed out and parachuted into the sea. Once in the water, he detached his parachute and spotted a life raft floating nearby, likely dropped by one of his crewmates before ejecting. He climbed in and looked around for his companions, but sadly, they didn't survive. 3 other planes had also been shot down. Several crew members had parachuted into the ocean. Soon, George noticed boats approaching from the distance. His heart sank. He thought they were Japanese forces coming to capture the downed pilots. Using his hands, he paddled the raft with all his strength, trying to escape their reach. But how could hand paddling match the speed of motorboats? The boats were closing in fast. Then suddenly, the roar of fighter planes shook the skies. Fresh American aircraft opened fire on the Japanese boats. The enemy retreated quickly back to the island. George was safe, for now. He began paddling again, trying to get even farther away. By evening, his arms were numb, his body in pain, and his nerves were shot. Still, there was no sign of any American rescue ship. Then suddenly, he noticed movement in the water nearby. A periscope was rising from the sea. It was a submarine. Submarines use periscopes to observe the surface while submerged. When the submarine surfaced fully, George's hope reignited. It was American. He was pulled aboard, saved at last. It seemed the story had ended on a hopeful note. But not for the others. 8 American crew members had been captured by the Japanese and taken back to Shishi Jima. They were thrown into a military prison. What happened next was so horrific that the U.S. government kept it secret until 2004. Enraged by the loss of their towers, Japanese forces, under Lieutenant General Yoshio Tachibana, decided to exact cruel revenge. Tachibana was a sadistic and mentally disturbed officer, known for extreme torture. Now his anger reached new heights. He ordered his men to beat a prisoner nearly to death, then behead him, cook his flesh, and eat it. Not just himself, he fed it to his soldiers as well. 3 more prisoners were tortured and then cooked alive. But the most horrific acts were committed on the final 4. They were kept alive while pieces of their bodies were cut off and cooked, then bandaged so they wouldn't bleed to death. This cycle continued until they were finally killed. This nightmare of torture and cannibalism lasted over a month. Each murder and meal was carried out in front of the surviving prisoners. After Japan's defeat, the U.S. discovered this horror with the help of captured Japanese personnel. Excavations on Shishi Jima uncovered the bones of the missing soldiers. The discovery was so shocking, the U.S. government ordered a complete media blackout. Until 2004, this incident remained hidden from the world. And finally, the ending. General Yoshio Tachibana and his men were found guilty of war crimes. On September 24th, 1947, they were executed by hanging in Guam. And the only pilot who survived this horrifying ordeal was George H.W. Bush, who would later become the 41st President of the United States.